Welcome to episode 92 of the Camerosity Podcast, the world's #1 open source film and digital photography podcast. My name is Mike Ekman, and we are back with yet another exciting episode. When it came time to think of a topic to discuss for tonight's episode, we looked back at all the brands of cameras we've discussed and which countries they came from. Models from Germany, Japan, the United States, and the Soviet Union are common and very well known. But there were many other countries who produced cameras, and while those countries may not be as prolific as the others, they're still worth discussing. So tonight, we turn our attention to cameras from Italy. The boot-shaped peninsula is known for many things, and after surveying the list of Italian cameras in my collection, I realize there's a lot of cool models which are worth discussing. Before we get started, we are joined by our host of the Camerosity Podcast, Theo Panagopoulos. Hey, Theo.
Hey, Mike. How's it going?
All right. Will Pinkham. How you doing, Will, the host of the show?
Not too bad. How are you guys?
All right. And Mr. AJ Gentile. How you doing, Mr. Host?
I'm doing great, Mike.
And our last host, Mr. Bob Rotoloni. Hey, Bob.
How you doing, Mike?
So I asked Robert to come specifically to this show, not just because he's Italian, but he does have a fondness for cameras from that country. And he had loaned me a book, which we were, right before we got started, we were discussing is one of maybe two books dedicated to the Italian camera industry that we're aware of. This one is literally called Made in Italy. It's by Marco Antonetto and Mario Malavolti. It's a red hardcover book. The print date is 1983, so I'm not aware of a more recent printing of this book. I'm sure it's out of print. AJ, were you able to find it online?
No, I'm still looking for it.
So you can't even find it. So it's a hardcover book. Let's see how many pages. Just under 200. You know, it's all black and white, and it's half in English, half in Italian. So you know, it's not necessarily 200 pages worth of content because a lot of the stuff is duplicated, but it's sort of a good starting point for some of the different brands that are out there. And I'd be willing to bet that if you were to ask just your typical camera collector to name as many Italian cameras, it might be a little difficult. AJ, can you think of an Italian camera brand?
I'm drawing a blank, honestly.
Drawing a blank. Okay. What about you, Will? Can you think of any?
I think the only one is the Bensini Comet.
Bensini. There you go. Bensini.
Yeah, I think there's another one, and I can't remember the name. All day I've been like, what is the other one?
Theo, you have at least a couple, right?
I'm just looking at them over here. We mentioned the Bensini, and I might as well bring one up straight. One of the weirdest cameras that I come across is the Bensini Comet 3.
Describe what it looks like, Theo.
It's basically looks like a little movie camera. It's a viewfinder camera. It's a 127 camera. Everything's on its side, so it looks like it's like a TLR, but you're looking at the back through it. Everything's on top of each other, and it's a really thin upright camera. It's got beautiful stripes down the front. You can see the Italian styling here. It's actually called the Bensini Comet 3 Milano, so I'm assuming it was made in Milan.
What type of film does it use?
127. So you can see the two windows at the back, which show you the number on the film. So and it's just a weird little camera. So I haven't tried it yet. I'm not sure if anybody has tried one of these before. Has anyone here seen or used one of these before?
Is it square format or rectangular?
Oh, that's a good question.
It's got the two red windows, so I'm going to go with it's probably 3x4 would be my guess.
I'd say so. Yeah, I can't even figure out how to open it.
Yeah, I have one. I know Mark Faulkner, who's not here tonight, he has one too. I don't think he's ever shot one, but yeah, come to think of it, I don't know if anybody's ever shot one of those cameras. And one thing that you already touched upon, which is fairly common throughout all Italian cameras, and is one of the reasons I like them so much, is that most of the Italian camera makers did not settle with just copying the German cameras or copying what the Japanese were doing. There's a lot of really bizarre cameras that were made in Italy, some quite innovative, which we'll get to in a little bit later. But I do really like the Bensini cameras because they were like a blank slate with some of those cameras, like the Comet 3, you know, like Theo described, it looks like a little 18 or 8 millimeter, maybe 16 millimeter motion picture camera, but it just shoots 127 film and it looks super cool. Whether you shoot it or not, it's a nice piece to have on your shelf. But I see, Theo, on your shelf, on your desk next to there's another Bensini. Do you have a Coral?
I have.
Yeah, I see it
I
there.
have the Benzini Corot. Now, this is really bizarre. This uses 120 film, but it doesn't use the whole frame. I've used this a couple of times actually. It's a very simple camera. It looks like a normal viewfinder camera that you'll find, one of the cheaper ones that you'll find out in the market. There is a rumor they were made from leftover aeroplane parts from the war, but I'm not sure how true that is. But if you look at the actual frame inside, even though you're using 120 film, it's actually chopping the top and bottom off it as well. So it's a really bizarre camera which just wastes film, but it's fun. It's something different.
It wastes film on the top and bottom, but don't you get 16 exposures, I think, out of a roll?
I think you probably would. Yes.
I just found one that doesn't have the mask. Supposedly this one shoots 6x6.
The Bensini cameras came in a ton of different sizes. Some of them genuinely do use 127, but I have one very similar to Theo's. Mine's called the Coral 2 or Corel 2. It looks very similar to Theo's. Mine is similar in that it uses 120 film. It uses 120 film, but it shoots a 3x4 image. So it's making images the same size as a 127 camera, but it's using 120 film. So the only explanation I can come for that was people liked the economy of 127, but for whatever reason, they couldn't make it or couldn't source it or something. I would assume for this being such an inexpensive camera, clearly 120 film was easier to come by back then, perhaps than 35 millimeter was. You'll hear that a lot in a lot of different countries, even Japan, where the cassettes to make 35 millimeter film, that was a lot of extra pieces. It was 35 millimeter, even though it's a smaller film, added additional complexity. So a lot of countries that didn't quite have the infrastructure or the economy to support a thriving photography industry often favored roll film cameras like 127 and 120 in the years after the war. So that sort of explains why these cameras try to be economical by producing small images so that you get more images per roll, but on a roll film format. Similar to why Japan loved half frame so much.
What size did you say that one was, Mike?
The two.
Yes.
This one shoots 3x4, 3 centimeter by 4 centimeter images on 120 film.
This one's 3 by 4.5.
Okay.
So this is a 24S, the Corel 24S. It's slightly different format again, isn't it?
Mhm.
I wonder if it's because the lenses just weren't up to to spec to actually do a whole frame, normal 120 sizes, and there was a way around it.
Your guess is as good as mine. And I would consult my Red Italian book. Unfortunately, it doesn't go into great deal history about each individual camera maker. So figuring out why some of these people did some of the things they did, I can't really say for sure. But speculatively, it seems plausible that it was done out of a necessity.
Well, after the war, Italy was in bad shape. Film was very expensive. It was just like Japan. The film was very expensive. And that's one of the reasons that manufacturers made certain things. They were forced to because of the availability of film.
Another thing that I saw parallels to with the French camera industry, because there's a lot of French makers too around the same time, starting in the late 40s, throughout the 50s, and sort of ending by the early 60s, is Germany, although the dominant maker of photography lenses, cameras, and such after the war, within a couple years, a lot of the German factories were able to get up and running, and their exports started going out to certain countries. Like you could get German cameras in England, you could get German cameras in the United States, but other European countries like France and Italy, even though Italy was an Axis power, their new government was very, we'll say, unhappy with the Germans. So they had applied extremely high import tariffs on anything German, to the point where even though the Germans were producing things by the early to mid 50s, they were incredibly expensive to import into France and Italy. And that's why you saw a lot of these companies, some of which had nothing to even do with photography prior and during the war, start producing them because there was a demand. Like people wanted cameras and they wanted things to shoot film with. And they couldn't get them from anywhere else. Japan wasn't big enough yet to have an impact on those countries. The Soviet Union was, still getting started and they weren't exporting too much stuff. So really, you either paid a crap load of money to import a German camera to Italy or France, or some of these homegrown companies just decided to produce their own stuff. So, like you said, Robert, the economy was a result of it. But what Theo said too, yeah, I bet you it had to do with they didn't have the expertise of Zeiss or Schneider to produce really high spec lenses. You know, when I look at my Bensini, it just says Bensini Acromatico. It's an f9 lens. So I mean, this is probably a meniscus.
Also, there's another aspect to this. There is a Minox C camera, which is engraved FI on the back. People think it means fabricated in Italy. It doesn't, but it means assembled in Italy.
Okay.
So what Minox was doing during the C era, which is kind of late, because of the differences in taxes or whatever and tariffs, they were having one of their models actually assembled in Italy so that to make it more available for the Italian market. So there was a lot going on at that time in Europe.
Well, another brand which maybe people don't immediately think of when they think of cameras, but another Italian company is Frania. Frania is a big time filmmaker.
They had a Rondine, the Frania Rondine. I used to have one. It's a little box camera. It's actually very nice. It came in multiple colors. It was called the Frania Rondine. Very nice little camera.
Was it a 6x6, like a 120
Oh,
camera?
I know. It was smaller than that. It was quite small. I can't remember what film it took.
Okay.
I had it like 40 years ago. But Frania, which was a filmmaker, Frania was a big maker of film in Italy.
So I did a review of a camera called the Frania Condor. They made a Condor 1 and a 2. This is a camera that on occasion, in my opinion, incorrectly gets grouped into a Leica copy, and it really isn't. It's if you blur your eyes, drink a fifth of vodka, and stand 15 feet away from it, maybe it does look like a kinda ish, but you know, holding it close, this is a camera that really doesn't have anything to do with anything remotely close to Leica. It's got a leaf shutter. The rangefinder windows are different. Just basically all the controls are different, but it is a pretty attractive camera. But Frania being a film company, while they did make a couple of their own cameras like the Rondine, like Robert was talking about, and this nice little attractive camera called the Ibis, which is like a little black, I don't know, I guess it's metal. It's metal. It's not Bakelite, but it might as well be Bakelite. There's a tiny little 127 camera that's real pretty. But the Condors were outsourced by yet another Italian company called Officine Galileo.
Galileo, yeah.
They produced a number of cameras, both under their own name, under Frania's name. And when you start to get into like step up models, like not quite your simple single shutter speed models like the Ibis or the Rondine or the Bensini Corals, the Condor would be kind of like it's a rangefinder. So it's sort of a slightly higher spec camera, and it's attractive. It's reasonably well built. And if, you know, properly found, cleaned, and, you know, taken care of throughout its life, I really enjoyed the example that I had shot for the review I did many years ago. That one was a loaner of mine. And the Condor was one of the Italian cameras that actually was exported to the United States. This is something you could have bought here for a short period of time too.
There was a Condor 1 and a Condor 2, and there was also a Condoretta, which was not a rangefinder. It was just a point and shoot. But they were very well made, and they had Galileo lenses.
Yeah. The Condor 2, I've never seen one in person. It's a little bit more modern of a camera. It's got square viewfinder, rangefinder windows. I actually do prefer the older model. I think it just has a more distinct look. I like the chrome bezel around the round windows and such like that. So I'm a fan of that model. I mean, I like all the Italian cameras, but you know, in the theme of what I was saying a little while ago, how the Italians really didn't copy anybody else. They sort of just came up with their own designs, and many of them are very, very attractive little cameras.
Well, they also were a trendsetter in a couple of places. The Rectaflex was way ahead of its time, okay? Very expensive camera. It was over $400 in 1950, which was a lot of money in 1950. And they made 4 or 5 different models of the Rectaflex, which was unique for its time. And also they had one of the best sub-miniatures ever made, which was the Gami, which was leaps and bounds ahead of a lot of other cameras. It did all kinds of things that other sub-miniatures couldn't do, you know, but the Gami, and also they had Ducati, which was a very good camera. But they made a lot of good stuff.
Don't you have a Gami, Robert?
I had 3 of them. I don't have any more now.
Okay.
I have nothing left. I have no Italian cameras. I had Condors. I had Rectaflexes. I had Gamis. I had Gamma, which is their Leica copy, which is a gorgeous camera. I had a Cristal. I had 4 or 5 of them, and they're all gone, unfortunately. I didn't keep them. I should have, but I didn't. But the Rectaflex was one hell of a camera. Really, it really was it was a very, very well made camera. Came with all kinds of lenses, ingenue, etc.
What was special about it though? What was it? It did something first.
It was one of the first eye level reflex cameras with,
Right.
it wasn't interchangeable finder, but it was really very well made. And they made about 4 or 5 different models. And they also made one in Liechtenstein, again, for tax reasons. It's actually engraved on the inside, Liechtenstein. It was a very, very well respected camera in its day. And they also made one called the Rectaflex rotor, which was
Yes.
similar to the thing that Leica made. Remember, with the rotor on the front for 3 lenses?
Right. So you didn't have zoom lenses. You basically had this
Yeah, you had 3
monstrosity.
lenses. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Probably 35, 50, and
Right.
100.
The camera
or
I had
130.
came with an Angenute, but they also came with Xenars. They came with Schneiders. They came with all kinds. Mine had an Angenute lens on it. So
Yeah, the Rectaflex is the top dog if you're into camera collecting or Italian camera collecting. I don't have one in my collection. I did review one that I was a loaner to me from somebody. I would love to add one because not just for the historical significance of them, but they're incredibly attractive looking cameras.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of typefaces, fonts. I really like when a camera has, its name written in a what I consider to be an attractive typeface, and the Rectaflex is just.
I just
absolutely
remember
gorgeous.
something. There was another Italian book. It's on the Rectaflex. There is a book written about the Rectaflex.
Okay.
Yeah, specific.
And I think, you briefly mentioned the version that was made in Liechtenstein, and I think it was more than just taxes. It was essentially the camera just wasn't selling well, and it was just getting to be too expensive to continue making it. I don't know, sold or had some type of agreement with Prince Francis Joseph II of Liechtenstein, who was big into photography, and he agreed to purchase the remaining assets of Rectaflex and started to resume production of those. And the cameras, the Liechtenstein ones are even more rare than a regular Rectaflex is, but they're easy to spot because they have like a crest, like a shield that's physically mounted. Yeah, coat of arms. There you go. That's the better way to say it. But we're talking big bucks there for those.
I'm looking at one on eBay right now, the Rectaflex Liechtenstein with a 40 centimeter 2.8, 11,000 US.
There you go, wow. 11 grand.
And the one you were talking about with the rotor, going for 6,100 US.
Oh, okay, so half the price. Not too bad.
With a 35, a 90, and a 135.
The top of the line Italian cameras tended to be expensive.
Yeah.
Because they weren't mass produced. Okay, they were basically handmade.
Everything Italian is expensive. Look at Manfrotto.
That's true.
I know it.
And Gitzo.
I have one.
So while we were talking, we have Walter, who is another one of our Discord server users joining us. He doesn't have his camera on, but Walter, do you want to say hi?
It's the first time that I'm using Zoom, so.
Okay, all right. Not too bad. We gave you the right link. So we started with Italian cameras. We've gone through Bensini. We briefly talked about the Frania cameras, the Condor, and you just heard us talking about the Rectaflex. Do you have any experience with any of these?
Absolutely nothing.
Nothing?
No. I only saw some prices on eBay and I was scared, so no, I never tried it.
I will apologize to people who like to buy stuff and after the show, that some of these models are going to be, they're unobtainium for me. Like, I don't own a Rectaflex. I don't own the Condor. I do have a couple of the other ones, though. The Bensinis are pretty affordable. I mean, Theo's got one. They made a boatload of them, and they're really neat if you like to collect stuff, because the Bensinis had so many different shapes and sizes and aspect ratios and such, too. So if you're a completist, Bensini cameras would be a good one to kind of target and go after.
The Ferrani's too, but actually, Mike, have you got a cluster?
I don't.
It's another smaller company, cluster.
Yeah, I've got one somewhere, but I can't seem to find it in my collection here at the moment. That's another rare one. That's
with very unique looks, also. They're very unique looking. The clusters,
Yeah, it's a rangefinder. It's a Leica-ish rangefinder. But it's got very unique looks, and it's almost got the Bensini looks in a normal rangefinder. It's quite attractive.
Another company that we don't think of very often is Durst.
Durst.
It doesn't sound Italian, but it was an Italian company. They made other things besides enlargers. They also made cameras. They were around for quite a while.
So Durst made 3 models. I have 2 of them. And the one that I don't have is
You have the Duca?
no, I don't have the Duca. The Duca is a goofy camera because it's similar in that it has that like vertical transport, right?
Yeah. I used to have one years ago, but I don't have that anymore either.
I have one somewhere, but I'm not going to try and pull it out now because I've got no idea where it is.
There's also a little weird camera, that Duca. Very strange looking camera.
It's very much like a comet type
Yeah.
camera. Comet 3. Yeah.
So Durst made very innovative cameras. The 2 that I do have, I have the Durst Automatica, which is, some people call it auto exposure, and it's not really, that's not a right way to say it. It doesn't necessarily do auto exposure. It uses mine doesn't work. So unfortunately, I've never actually been able to see how it works, but it uses like a pneumatic delay that causes it to take a reading and automatically stop down the lens to whatever light setting you have. And depending on whether or not you set the shutter speed to the fastest shutter speed, which is 1/300th, it'll somehow make the shutter fire slower if it needs to get proper exposure. So like it's like an incredibly crude version of auto exposure that requires you to have the camera set a certain way. Again, although I do have one and I find them being very attractive cameras, mine doesn't work. Like I tried reading a little bit about how it was supposed to work and how it uses pneumatics, like some kind of air piston or something, which was something that Durst had developed either for or with cooperation of Agfa, which the German manufacturer Agfa, because they had an auto exposure camera, I think 1956, called the Agfa Auto 66, I think that's what it was called. And that's uses the same mechanism that the Durst Automatica does to achieve this sort of pseudo auto exposure. I apologize for being so vague. Yeah, it was called the Agfa Automatic 66. If you look that one up, AJ, that one's an expensive one too. But the Automaticas are just really sweet looking cameras. They do work manually. So if the metering system like on mine doesn't work, you can still shoot them manually. You know, it has the manual range of shutter speeds from 1-300. You could, stop down the lens if you want. It looks like it should be a rangefinder, but it actually isn't. It's just a scale focus camera, film advance lever. This one has a radio nor lens, so it's got German optics, but otherwise an Italian design camera that's, I think, very, very attractive. And again, I'm going to keep saying it, but I just love how the Italian camera industry came up with their own designs. They weren't happy to just completely copy what other people are doing. In fact, the Cluster is probably the most, even though it's attractive too, the Cluster is one of the most not Italian looking of the cameras. It does sort of look like the Cluster could have been a Japanese or a German camera, but most of them usually have pretty unique looking designs, layouts, controls. I've always loved cameras with a front shutter release. The Durst Automatica has that. But the other one, this one's called the Durst Auto 66. And once again, it uses that kind of weird pneumatic exposuring system, but it's not automatic because this one doesn't actually have a light meter on it. But you basically control exposure by turning a dial. For it being a very simple looking camera, it actually supports speeds from 1 second up to 1/200th of a second, which is an unusually wide range of shutter speeds for what is otherwise a very basic 6x6 medium format camera. But when the shutter fires, it uses the resistance of the pneumatic piston, for lack of a better word, to allow you to get those slower shutter speeds. So again, this one doesn't work, unfortunately. I would suspect that very few of these can be found in working order, but I suspect that when it did work, if you fired the shutter at the 1 second speed, rather than the familiar ticking noise that you'd hear from the clockwork slow speed escapements that pretty much every other camera had, it was probably completely silent because it's essentially air flowing through almost like a cylinder, like in an automobile or something like that, to slow it down. So unfortunately, the thing about the Durst 66 is it has a very basic lens, a maximum aperture of f8. So again, probably a doublet if I had to guess. It says, it's just interesting. It says, this can't be right. It says the lens is 2.2 centimeters. Right.
2.2 centimeters.
That would be 220 millimeters. That'd be super telephoto. I don't know. Maybe it is a telephoto lens camera. Never shot it. Don't know. But I think it looks cool.
I found one that looks absolutely fantastic. It's on a website called novacon.com.br. It's got oddity cameras and 35 millimeter Italian cameras. This guy, who's obviously Italian, has his name is Luigi Crescenzi. Yeah. So he's obviously got some very rare cameras. Obviously, Bob, you know of him. And he's got one called the Costruzioni Ottico Meccanici half frame camera. It's gold. It's got the dials like those Nikons with the dials on top, those little compact cameras we talked about last episode, which
the TI.
Yeah, it's got a dial on top that looks similar to that. Obviously, it's mechanical. It's not. It's and it's a half frame gold camera. This thing is absolutely gorgeous. It's got little leather pieces on the side. I want one, but
what's it called again, Theo?
The Costruzioni Ottico Meccanici. So my Italian's getting better each time.
Yeah.
Funny enough, I actually spent 12 months in Milan once on some work I was working with. So, and I never really picked up the language well enough, which is a bit of a shame.
Luigi, by the way, is one of the largest Leica collectors in the world. Tremendously huge Leica collector.
I can see down the bottom he's he's sitting there with his prototype Leica collection.
Yeah.
So he's not just collecting the cameras; he's collecting prototypes and all sorts of things.
He also makes custom leather cases for Leicas.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's that Luigi.
Theo, what's his last name again?
Crescenzi.
Luigi Crescenzi, I think it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, his website is novacon.com.br, which wouldn't that suggest that he's in Brazil? Isn't that the top level domain?
He's in Italy.
Whichever way you look at it, he's got some very unique Italian cameras on his site, which are absolutely gorgeous. Some of them, even the ultra miniature 16mm Pava San Giorgio. So I didn't even realize there was a 16mm Italian camera.
So let's think optimistically about this show. Like the feedback from this episode is going to be the Camerosity crew butchered a whole bunch of Italian names, rattling off models that they don't really know a lot about. But maybe
with 2 Italians on the episode.
Right, exactly. Who still didn't know what the heck they were talking about. But let's look on the bright side. Maybe that will like bring some people out of the woodwork so that we could do a future Italian camera episode where we actually know what we're talking about. So this is like we have all new hosts, Theo, myself, Robert, AJ, everybody's a host today. Walter, you could be a host too. So Miles is here. Congratulations, you were promoted. You're a host too. But no, Robert brought up a brand that I'm really excited to talk about. So I've saved my 3 favorite Italian cameras, 2 of which Robert mentioned, but third one hasn't been brought up yet. But I'll switch to Ducati because this is one that I've most recently reviewed. Yeah. The Ducati is a one-of-a-kind. Ducati, it is the same company that makes the motorcycles. They originally got started in the 30s making like radios and radio parts. And like a lot of those type of European manufacturers, they produced stuff, we'll just say. Then the war, they produced stuff for the war effort, but their factory was basically obliterated. So the company has sort of had to pivot and start over. And they basically went in 2 simultaneous directions, one of which was making bicycles and motorbikes, which eventually turned into their Ducati motorcycle division. But they also started making cameras. And the one camera that they decided to produce is called the Ducati Sogno. If you had never seen this camera next to anything else, like let's say I just showed you a picture of the Ducati camera with nothing to scale, you would think, oh, it's a pretty attractive looking rangefinder camera. But what you kind of miss until you see it held up next to another camera is how ridiculously tiny it is. Yeah. So here's the Ducati, and then here's the Durst that I was talking about earlier.
Oh, wow.
This is like a half-scale camera compared to anything else, but it's a half-frame camera. It shoots 18 by 24 half-frame images. It does use regular 35 millimeter double perforated 35 millimeter film, but it's so tiny, it's so thin that you cannot fit a typical Kodak spool in there. You do need special spools. And for those of you who haven't read my review, you'll hear my saga, and that when I got this camera, it did not have a spool in it. Like sometimes you can finagle film by using like the empty core of a 35 millimeter spool sometimes in a camera. I couldn't do it. I couldn't find any way to be able to use this camera without having a genuine Ducati spool. So quick show of hands, how many of you think that finding an unused Ducati film spool is an easy thing to find? No one's holding their hands up.
Oh,
It took me a year to finally find one straight from Italy. I mean, I had to expand to, European eBay to even find someone who had one. And we'll just say that I spent more on a spool, and it's tiny. Like, I mean, it's a third of the size of a 35 millimeter spool to not only buy it, but to get it shipped overseas just to have the correct spool so that I could hand roll some 35 millimeter into this camera and be able to shoot it. But I'm really glad that I did, because this camera is really, really neat. It does have an interchangeable mount, so there were other lenses for it. I only have one lens for it. It's got a cloth focal plane shutter. It's like a scaled down Leica, I guess. I mean, it's got shutter speeds from 1/20th up to 1/500th. They did make a prototype that would have had a slow speed governor, but it never went into production. It is a rangefinder. I mean, it's essentially like they did make the Canadian Leica that did half frame, but the camera was still the same size as a regular Leica. This would have been a true half frame, interchangeable lens, 35 millimeter rangefinder camera that was sized like a half frame camera. I mean, this is, I'd say, I don't have one handy, but this is even smaller than an Olympus pen. And it's a lot thinner than one too, because I said, it won't fit the one. So this one is not a cheap camera to have if you have to spend a lot of money just to be able to find a spool, just to be able to use it. But I'm really glad that I did. I did enjoy shooting it. It is small. I mean, I don't have one on, but if I had a button-up shirt, it very easily will fit in a shirt pocket. It's not incredibly heavy, but because of how tiny it is, you know how when things are tiny, they get dense and they have that illusion of being heavier than they really are. This one is 366 grams. So, I mean, that's quite a bit. Yeah, that's a lot less than what a Leica would have. But when you hold it, it's impressive in how dense it is. Very, very high quality. If you do get a chance to pick one of these up, they are quite gem-like. And unfortunately, this is the only thing they ever made, other than the prototypes that would have had the slow speed governor. In my research for this model, they did have a few other kinds that slightly looked a little different, but nothing really ever, no real significant changes to the overall design. And they made quite a few lenses for it. They had lenses all the way up to 120 millimeter, which, remember, that's half frame. So that's, like I think 200 millimeters. So, they made these for about 6 years. And after that, they just decided to leave the camera business and focus on motorcycles. And I think they were still making radio parts at that time too. But really neat camera. And I'm a broken record here, but I just love how it's different. And even though I did say the L word a number of times, it truly is its own camera.
I love the single lug design.
Oh, with the strap loop, you mean on the side? So yeah, I mean, I don't have anything on here, but this could be something you could wrap around your wrist like a pen. I wouldn't recommend it though, because I feel like it would tug on your wrist a little bit too much. But yeah, there's only one lug on one side of the camera for this one.
And would you really want to put the Rolly 35 dents all over it?
Yes, that's true. This one has no dents. I got to make sure I put it away cleanly before I create a dent on it.
I just found one over here with 7 film cassettes going for $2,500 US.
So take away the film cassettes. that's a pretty good deal.
It is. It's not bad.
You could buy that and sell 6 of those cassettes and make a good chunk of your money back. Which lens does it have, AJ?
This one had,
because the kit was either a 2.8 or a 3.5 Vitor.
This is what a 35 millimeter.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. That's a Vitor.
Vitor, is it the 2.8 or the
Yeah,
3.5?
3.5. Yeah, it's the
Okay.
3.5.
So that's probably a slightly older one. The 2.8s originally came uncoated, and then the last ones are coated. And I'm fortunate enough to have one of the coated ones, so that means mine's one of the later produced ones.
It looks like they also had a fixed lens
Yes.
viewfinder only version.
That one is the Ducati
Simplex.
That's it. The Ducati Simplex. You're right. I'm sure that's still not cheap, though.
It's a bit of a rabbit hole, this Italian cameras bit, because when we first started planning it, I thought, I've only got one or two and don't know much about it. And then as we've been talking, I've been finding I've got more, lots of different ones. They're sort of through the collection. And then it's a much deeper collection than you think, actually.
It is. And that's why I like it so much. I mean, obviously, we've talked many times about the Czech cameras, the Miopta, the Flexorats. Miopta made the Micromas. They had, the stereo cameras. They made a bunch of scale focused simple cameras too. And like I mentioned earlier, France had a fairly substantial camera industry, but Italy is like probably my favorite of the not big companies. Like, I don't think too many people would immediately think of Italy when they think of mid 20th century camera makers, right? But they were definitely there, and they had a lot of really cool products, and they tried new things, coming up with auto exposure before anybody else did, using pneumatics, creating an interchangeable lens 35 millimeter half frame camera. And then the one I haven't gotten to yet, but the one that Robert did briefly mention, this is called the Gamma.
I was just going to ask you if you had a Gamma.
Yeah, so this one came from Kurt. This is one of my favorite ones that I got from him. And this is the closest to a Leica that they ever made. But it looks very different and functions very different. The top plate is laid out very weirdly. The most striking feature of the Gamma is if you look at the profile here, it's better from the bottom. It's got these little humps. There's one right here, and there's one on the other side too. And when you're holding it, the humps are actually like little finger grips, like think of like a Nikon F3. It has the little finger grips. The Canon A1 had the little finger grips, but those are cameras from the late 70s and early 80s. This is a 1950s camera that has twin grips. So you could hold it with your left hand. You could hold it with your right hand. It's very comfortable, but those bumps actually serve a purpose. And the purpose is not clear until you take the back off.
Has to do with the shutter mechanism.
Has to do with the shutter. That is right. So this is a focal plane shutter camera, like a Leica. I doubt you'll be able to see it really easily, but it's curved.
Yeah.
So the shutter actually travels along like a parabola, and it's metal too. So it's a metal blade shutter, and where it ends is inside these little bumps in the front of the camera. So think of, try, for those of you listening at home, I know it's hard to understand, just Jeff and Gabe love that I keep referring back to my site, but this is when you really need to because I have a lot of pictures of it. Just picture 35 millimeter rangefinder camera like a Leica, but instead of the shutter going parallel to the back of the camera, it curves, and it starts at the front of the camera, it curves back along the film plane, and then ends up on the other side. And it's a focal plane shutter, so it's got a first and a second curtain. I can't speak to the reliability of, how other examples work because this is the only one I have, but the timing on this thing is perfect. When I shot it, the shutter speeds worked great at all the speeds. Granted, it only goes down to 20, but it has a top 1/1000th shutter speed. And because these are metal curtains that are probably predictably tensioned, there's no silk straps like on a Contax rangefinder. If you accidentally leave the lens out in the sunlight focused to infinity, you don't have to worry about pinholes of sunlight burning holes through the cloth curtains. They're not going to dry rot. Now, that's not to say they can't still fail. I'm sure they can. I'm sure these cameras need a proper surfacing and CLA like any other camera does too. But the design of the shutter is very clever. It feels like it is well designed, but again, this is the only one I have. So for all I know, this has been serviced in the last 10 years or something. And the fact that nobody else built a camera like this also suggests that there's probably a reason for that too. But they clearly decided to do their own thing. They weren't content to just copy the Leica shutter or the Exacta shutter or any other of the cloth focal plane shutters. Zeiss Icon's vertically traveling shutter was far too complicated. So I feel like this was some kind of Italian compromise, but it works really, really well. and it's got an interchangeable lens mount. Most Gammas have a screw mount. The one that I have is the earlier model. It has a bayonet mount too. So, unfortunately, they thought they would come up with their own mount when the cameras were first released. Quickly realized that maybe if we're going to make a Leica S camera, we should probably make it accept Leica lenses. So they did quickly switch to a Leica thread mount. I think they're really neat. I mean, it's a pretty camera. It works differently. The whole back comes off, so it's not a bottom loader. Like I said, interchangeable lenses. So they did make other lenses for it. It's a rangefinder. It's 2 separate windows. So it's got the viewfinder window on the right and the coupled combined image rangefinder on the left with high magnification. So that should mean that it's fairly accurate. And I really like this camera too. So when it comes to, in my opinion, the top echelon of Italian cameras, you have the Rectaflex and the Gamma are really, really new. This one's called the Gamma 2. But they made a couple different variations of it as well. So did you ever have one of those, Robert?
Yes, I did. I had a Gamma quite a few years ago, and I probably should have kept it, but I didn't. And it worked perfectly. Very well made.
I hope someone listening to this can speak to it who's maybe taken one apart, and maybe we're just really lucky. But there's just something about the way this camera is constructed. Like, it's believable to me that this was a well-built, reliable design that for just whatever reason never caught on. Maybe it was too complicated. Who knows? Maybe they patented it and didn't want to share. You never know. Has anybody been browsing, looking up any Italian cameras while I've been talking?
I've got something, but I'm going to actually have a bit of a lead in to this particular camera.
Okay.
I hope everybody can see this. Sorry, I've got my lights on a bit too strong today and you can't see things. This is a Hanimex Eaglet. Probably wondering, Theo, but the Hanimex, that's an Australian company.
That's Australian.
What are you showing? Yeah, it's Australian. G'day, mate. And the interesting thing is, this is technically a Phototecnica Eaglet, which is another Italian company which made cameras. And the Eaglet is, just to describe for people listening, is basically a simple box camera. A very, very pretty one, actually. And Phototecnica has made quite a few box cameras, which are really pretty. But it also made a camera called the Herman, which is, it looks like it's a viewfinder camera, and it's a 35mm. It's also very pretty and very nice as well. But they also made the Herman Olympic, which looks like it's a rangefinder. It's got the 2 windows. It's gold. It's got the Olympic symbols on it. And according to Collectorland, the last one sold for just under $15,000.
Oh,
It's a little more than a Rectaflex.
Yes, it is. So it's a shame we don't have Ira on here today. So because he would probably be jumping on something like this.
I like how, Theo, so far you've lusted over 2 Italian cameras that are both gold.
Yes, it's like. Hey,
They
can
also
you
made a
imagine?
gold Rectaflex, by the way. They made a gold Rectaflex.
did they?
also.
There you go. But can you imagine if you let the Italian photo industry thrive and become big, like the German and the German and the UK and all the other industries? If you let them become huge, we would have ended up with cameras made out of leather, gold, possibly marble.
yes.
and so it would have been absolutely fantastic.
Well, that was a point that I was eventually going to get to, but I'm glad you brought it up now, Theo, is that I really wish this industry would have survived. As much as I love Japanese cameras, I love this hobby. There's so many exciting models. I mean, even though I've been doing this for over 10 years, I still on occasion see something I've never seen before. But there is sort of like, if you've ever dug into Japanese 6x6 TLRs, like Rolleicord and Rolleiflex copies, there's like 100 different, and they're all the same. Right? How many Japanese 2.8 fixed lens rangefinders have you seen? Right? How many Leica screw mount Leica copies have you seen? How many box cameras or folding Kodaks have you seen that all basically work the same way? With the Italian camera industry, though, almost everything was new. And even when it did borrow like that, hold up that eagle again that you had, Theo. For the people at home, this thing's got like a brushed stainless steel front. Is that crinkle finish on the sides, Theo?
It is crinkle, yeah. It's a very smooth crinkle though, but yes,
Yeah.
crinkle.
Theo's on the other side of the planet holding up a camera to his webcam on his laptop through a Zoom call, and I can just tell that it just looks pretty. I want one. So, I mean, there's so many different options for cameras that are just really neat looking. The Durst looks cool. It had a primitive form of auto exposure. The Gamma had the goofy curved shutter. The Ducati was a, everything half frame camera that everything was sort of shrunk down. Bensini decided to make one model for every combination of film size that they possibly could. And I think there's even some 35 millimeter Bensinis too. But if that industry would have survived the 60s and continued as a leader in optics, we would have had some really wild looking cameras today. I really believe that.
Look how different the Gammy was than all the other 16 millimeters that were out there. The Gammy was completely unique.
Describe it, because that's one I've never had before.
Okay, well, you got a camera that's about a little bit bigger than a pack of 100 length cigarettes. It's very heavy. It has speeds up to 1,000th of a second. It has a built-in exposure meter. It has a built-in rangefinder. Okay, you bring down the front of it and you cock it. You get 3 frames motorized. It takes 3 shots with a motor. Close the frame, close the handle again, open it up. You get 3 more. It took interchangeable lenses. They made a telephoto lens for it. You can do everything with it. You set the lens speeds, you set the shutter speeds, and it focused just like a regular camera. It was very well made, and it was also quite expensive for its time. But it borrowed from no one. It borrowed from absolutely no one. It was totally unique.
It almost looks like a thicker Minox, kind of.
It is thicker, and of course it's wider. Like I say, it's about as wide as a pack of cigarettes, but it's thicker than a pack of cigarettes would be. And it's about 4 inches long, I would think, from memory.
Okay.
But I haven't had mine for a while now. And it was very well made. Very well made.
And that's the problem I was describing with the Ducati, is that you almost need to see it next to something else to get a sense of scale. Because I'm on the camera wiki page for it now, and it looks gorgeous. I'm reading the specs of it. It's 16 unperforated 16 millimeter film. It came with a 25 millimeter f1.9 lens.
Right.
The shutter speeds range from half a second to 1/1000th, which is really impressive.
Yes.
It has an exposure meter. Did you say it had a motor drive too?
Well, it does. You bring that front down and you cock it, and you get 3 frames. Then you got to just close it and open it again. You get 3 more.
Right, like it's a ratcheting kind of system, and it winds it just enough for 3.
Yep.
Man, all right, that is neat.
And the ones I had actually worked.
I feel like you've had one since I've known you.
Yeah, I had 3 of them at one time.
You must have sold them recently then.
Yeah, I had 3 of them at one time. Yeah.
All right. Well, I apologize for people looking this stuff up, because this is going to be an expensive episode.
Yo, that Gammy 16, I'm looking at 1600 over here, US.
So even though I love the Gamma, the Gammy, I love the Dursts, and I think that I like the typeface of the Rectaflex. One of the wildest Italian cameras that I really, really like is this thing. It's called the Industria Scientifica Offica ISO, or Attica ISO Super Duplex 120. It is a dual lens stereo camera. So it's stereo photography on 120 film. But if you were wondering, gee, Mike, what size exposures does this camera make? It shoots square format 24 by 24 millimeter images. So it's shooting square images just like on a stereo realist. A lot of 35 millimeter stereo cameras from the mid 20th century shot this exact size, except this does not use 35 millimeter film. It uses 120. And the film gate is only as wide as a single exposure. You just get 2 of them side by side. So you put regular 120 roll film on here, and you get 24 stereo pairs. Even cooler, if you get the super model, because there's a non-super model, which has a fixed lens. This one is a full focusing lens, but it has a little switch, which allows you to shoot single images or double images. So let's say you don't like shooting stereo photography and you just really like square format film. With a single roll of 120 film, you can get 48 exposures of square format film on a single roll of 120. Now, if you're sending your film out to a photo finisher to develop for you, they're going to hate you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
Imagine a roll of 120 filled with 48 square images on it. You would probably have to get really creative with cutting and mounting into some kind of slide mount or something like that. But it has twin lenses, 35 millimeter f3.5. They're coupled together, so as you focus one, they both turn. It has a range of shutter speeds from 1/10 to 1/200th plus bulb, an adjustable diaphragm. It's fully flash synchronized for both bulbs and X-Sync. And it's in a body, I mean, really about the size of like one of the 6x4.5 Icoflexes, or Icontas, I mean, the Zeiss Iconta.
Have you shot this camera, Mike?
I have not, and I keep meaning on it.
When you do, I've got a challenge for you.
Okay.
Because yes, you can do the stereo and you can do the single frames, but I want to see the ultimate diptychs.
Oh, geez.
Surely you've got two square pictures next to each other on a single frame of 120, effectively. I want to see some very creative diptychs.
They also had a viewer for that.
Yes, they did.
I'm looking at the ISO stereo viewer Visore for duplex 120 boxed, and you'd pass the 120 straight through, and it looks like a pair of binoculars.
And not only that, and I'm not sure if you've got this, Mike, is if you look at Luigi's site, he's got one of those on there. It actually has this really beautiful stand to actually put on the camera as well, with a sort of like a holder, so you could actually do, I don't know, close-ups or something, or frame with it. I can't quite work it out, but it looks absolutely gorgeous. But yeah, I can see the viewer as well, AJ. It's it's a complete system, isn't it?
It is. Oh, Mike, you got to test that one.
Yeah,
I will. It's on the agenda. I just have to get around to doing it, but I definitely will. I promise. And what's cool too is, because you're using 120 film and you're only advancing it about half the length, because the film gate is only as wide as the images. So it has the two windows in the back, just like a 127 camera. I would even suspect that some people may even see this and think, oh, that's a 127 camera. But in reality, it's 120, and you just use each exposure number twice. Like if you look at the backing paper for 120 film, the square images run right through the center of it, and they only go 1 to 12. You basically use each number twice. So you use 1 in the first window, advance it to where the 1 is in the second window, shoot the next 2 pairs again. Then you advance it to where the number 2 is in the first window. Then you advance it again where the 2 is in the second window. And you keep doing that until you get to 12, which really would be 24.
Okay, Mike, you also, when you test it out, you have to tell us how many times you've double exposed
or
got blank frames.
Half the roll. And I'll tell you, I kind of glossed over this. That little switch that allows you to do singular, it doesn't actually stop the 2 shutters from firing. They still both fire at the exact same time. But if you want to shoot where the left and right images are 2 different things, you have to keep replacing the lens cap. So the lens cap, they dangle, it's 2 separate lens caps that are connected to a cord. So you also, in addition to having to remember to advance it correctly, you have to keep remembering to alternate the lens cap if you want to do it. But what that switch actually does is it deactivates the double exposure prevention, allowing you to fire twice without ever having to advance the film. So it would require a tremendous amount of concentration to shoot a whole roll and get 48 distinct images without overlapping or skipping anything.
Yeah, it reminds me of something. When I was working in Italy, the Italians themselves actually told me, they said, look, if you have a map and you need to go from point A to B, you'd have the Germans, they'd go straight, functional, straight there. You'd have the English, they'd go around the side of the coast and have a bit of a look. But if you have the Italians, they'd literally go, up, down, left, right, center, around the destination, and then land there.
Back to this book, Made in Italy by Marco Antonetto and Mario Malavolti. And this book came out in 1983. So that crazy gold camera, the first one you saw, Theo, isn't even mentioned in here. But as of the printing of this book, I'm not going to count, but there's well over 150 different cameras in here.
Wow.
There's in the Ferrania, there's at least 25 different models. The Condor 1, 2, the Condoretta, Delta, Electa, Ilioflex, Jura, Falco, Falco S, Falco 2, the Ibis, which I showed you before too, the Lens Rapid, the Zephyr, the Zeta. And then you get into some of these brands that like I've never heard of before, like Lamperetti and Garbagnati Mirror, Murer. There's probably 35 mirror models here.
They were big before the war, I think.
Okay. They have a stereo reflex. They have, I mean, there's just so many. I mean, to borrow what Theo said earlier, the Italian camera industry is extraordinarily deep.
What camera is on the cover, Mike? I can't remember. What's that camera on the cover?
It's the Gammy.
That's your Gammy. That lever you see hanging down, okay, that lever, when the camera is closed up, that lever, of course, is up. When you pull that down, that cocks the shutter and cocks that motor, and you get 3 frames. Then you close it back up, and you bring it back down, and you get 3 more.
So, I mean, the lever is like 3/4 the width of the entire camera.
Yeah, and you use it like a handle. You can use it like a handle.
Yeah, it's a substantial handle. Yeah, for sure. So, for Theo, if you were like mildly wondering, well, how much is there really to cover about the Italian camera industry? The few models that I do have barely scratches the surface. And there's so many just really neat models. Unfortunately, there's just not the wealth of information. You know, there's no good camera wiki site that has incredible amounts of detail. You'll often find when something is mentioned, you'll find maybe 2 paragraphs, maybe 3 paragraphs of just really basic information without much history. You're not going to find a lot of like period advertisements, which I always find interesting. You're certainly not going to find magazine reviews of these cameras because a lot of these were made by like small boutique shops that probably during the war did something. And now that the war is done, these people had to make a living and find ways to just make stuff to sell because they couldn't get these things from Germany or any of the other countries. So a lot of these models are made out of necessity.
If only we had an author that wrote about cameras in our midst. You know, someone like, you know, someone maybe that concentrated on Nikon in the past and could could write about Italian cameras.
He's looking at you, Bob. How do you feel? Do you have one more book left in you?
No, I don't think so. I'm all booked out.
I'm booked out.
It's worth a try.
Do you still have some inventory of your Nikon book?
Oh, yeah.
So people can still buy straight from you, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I sell signed copies.
Yep, he'll sign them for you. It is, I know I didn't mean to pivot to Nikon, but I think that is the greatest single system book ever. Like Larry Gubas's book is probably the only one that has more information in one single book than yours does, but he covers the entirety of Zeiss.
He had a lot more to cover, yeah.
Right. I mean, if anything, the biggest knock I have towards Zeiss and photography is that it's difficult to find what you're looking for in it. Whereas your book, like if I want to find the lenses, you have all the 35mm lenses nice together in order. You know, so if I want to read about an 85 and I'm on the 50s, I just turn a couple more pages and I'll get to the 85s. You have the different models in sequential order. You keep all the accessories in one area too. So your book, Robert, is not only chock full of amazing historical information, it's a lot more than just the McKeown's book or the Sugiyama book, which is essentially just like a catalog. You know, you do have the detail and the historical stuff too, but it's easy to find. Whereas some of these other books, sometimes, even though they do have great information, they can be a little bit difficult to find exactly what you're looking for.
There is actually a link to Nikon with Italians. I mean, think about who designed the red stripe on the grip.
On the F3, yeah.
That's on the F3, yeah.
Which they continue.
Yes.
Right through into the digital, the DSLR.
They do a pretty good job over there with cars. So people like the way they design their cars. So, you know, the cameras actually, if you look at their cameras, you say, well, they look so nice and different and whatever. Basically, you're looking at maybe some of the same designers that worked on cars because their cars are also unique. So they've got it in their blood over there.
I used to have a Fiat Spider, and I can tell you that it's probably, of all the cars I've owned since, and I've owned some really nice cars, it's probably the most fun car I've ever had. It is just, yeah, they're just absolutely, even the, you know, it's a lower end one, but it's just so much fun the way, you know, this thing just rattled and sounded and just the way it drove. It was just,
which one was that, Phil? Which car?
The Fiat Spider.
I had in college a Fiat 124 coupe. I didn't.
Oh,
my dad
nice.
He wouldn't let me get the Spider because it was, too small. So I ended up getting the coupe. But it was a 124 Fiat, fabulous car.
What ended the Italian camera industry? Was it just competition or
competition and price? I think competition and price. Their industry was never organized on a scale, a large scale. It was all small scale stuff. Okay, and as time went by, the way the industry was going, you had to be big to make money. You had to be big for the R&D. Okay, and that's what happened. And a lot of the Italian companies were doing things on the side. It wasn't really their only business. They were doing other things, and they didn't actually promote it very well. They didn't have any good importers here in the United States, which was the market. I mean, we were the market. There was nobody in Europe to buy their stuff. Everybody was poor, but their own people couldn't buy it. So they didn't have any good importers, and the volume just wasn't there. It's amazing that they came out with as many different cameras as they did.
Right.
Because R&D is very expensive to do, especially when you're working from scratch like they were. They weren't copying anyone. So it died. It made it up to about around 1960. They started to fade.
Yep. And the exact same thing happened in France too.
Yes.
A lot of the French camera makers around, Royer was a huge French camera maker, 61, 62, and that was it. It was everything Robert said, but by then the post-war tariffs in Germany had subsided. But then even more than that by then the Japanese camera industry was in full swing, and the Japanese's ability to mass produce things faster and cheaper and better built than a lot of the handmade ones that even the Germans were building is ultimately why so many of these camera companies just disappeared. It's the same reason Argus stopped making cameras in the United States. It's the same reason that a lot of, Rolly started outsourcing things to Singapore in the 70s because they just couldn't compete anymore. The Japanese were so good at making quality stuff cheaply, easily, and affordable that you either had to adapt or shut your doors and just do something else.
Also, their development times were very short. They could do things very quickly. Joe Ehrenreich with Nikon, he'd go to Japan half a dozen times a year, and he'd go there and he'd mention to them things that pros in the United States were asking for. Okay, this and that, whatever it might be. He'd come back 3 months later or 4 months later, and they'd have a working prototype for him. That's how fast they could turn things around. So they were coming to market with things before the Germans ever got around to it. Okay, the Germans were good, but they were too meticulous sometimes, or their engineers just worked slower. The Japanese were quicker at what they did, and they designed them good from the beginning. And they made them mass production, but they made them good. They made them well, and they had the right mindset for it too. But their turnaround time was amazing. Even to this day, their turnaround time is amazing, how fast they can make things.
Well, in some ways, China is the new Japan. You can get prototype things made. I saw something recently about, American companies that want to make a quick, tiny little product. You can just draw up an idea and submit it, and a couple companies will they'll fabricate prototypes for you and give you a price, and off you go. And that's just sort of what happens with these new markets that come out of, I don't want to say nowhere, because the Japanese were making a lot of things way before they ever made Nikon cameras, but they were new to the market. They were the unheard of brand. There was a lot of distrust in the United States for a while with Japanese goods. Nikon it took a while even to find them in the Midwest, like Chicago camera stores.
We were the last. Yeah.
Right. You could get them on the West Coast. You can get them on the East Coast.
Couldn't get them in Chicago.
Right. So there was a lot of distrust of Japanese goods for a while. And then finally, when in many ways, the photography industry in Japan is what opened the door for companies like Sony and Toshiba and Nintendo, even Toyota, Honda, all by the 70s and 80s, people pretty much accepted that the Japanese are good at making things less expensive, higher quality, and they took over many, many markets. I mean, I'm still a Sony snob when it comes to televisions. People always ask me, what TV should I buy? And I go, buy a Sony. And they're like, yeah, but they're way more expensive than what I can get from Walmart. It's like, well, I made the mistake of buying a 55-inch Sony Bravia in 2010 before I was married. And then I got married, bought a house with my wife, and we still had that TV. And I told my wife, I said, I want to get a bigger TV. And she goes, well, Mike, this TV works fine. Like, why do you want to get a new TV? I'm like, well, it's only 55 inches. I want to get a bigger TV. She goes, you can't get a new TV until this one breaks. I'm like, but it's a Sony. She goes, well, that's not my problem. So that TV still works. So I guess when it came to upgrading my television, buying Japanese did not work in my favor, even though I'm glad it still worked and it's a nice television. But anyway, it's not what we're here to talk about.
Could we circle back to Rectaflex again?
Yeah, sure.
I've been shopping for them the last 30 minutes, and one thing I noticed about them is I'm screwed.
Yeah.
They have completely rounded corners on the edges, on the ends.
Huh?
And I can't think of another SLR that did that.
I can't either right now.
Yeah.
They have Leica type endings.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
it
Leica
is
type.
round.
Yeah.
It is round. I like how the Penaprism is like flat but wide. It has a different look to it. Now
It's not obtrusive. Yeah.
I will tell you this though, Miles, if you do decide to buy one, they're not easy to use. The viewfinder, this is the first widely produced. I mean, Zeiss did have a Penaprism prototype Contax SLR in like 39. It never made it past the prototype stage because of the war, and it wasn't really until the Contax S that they had something for the market. So the Rectaflex did beat it by a little bit. But I will tell you that the one that I used, and it was of dubious working condition. So I'll at least acknowledge that perhaps a mint condition one might be marginally better. But from what I understand, all of them, the viewfinder is very dark. If you were to buy one thinking, oh my God, this camera is so gorgeous, it's historically amazing, I want to go out and shoot a whole bunch of rolls of film on it, you're going to struggle with it. It's not a very easy camera to shoot. So just keep that in mind.
Okay, good to know.
You're still screwed, Mars. You're still screwed.
Still screwed.
Yeah.
Because they are gorgeous. And on occasion, like honestly, they've been on the back of my radar for quite a while too. The one that in my review is from Mike Novak. He loaned his to me. His shutter has pinholes in the curtains. The shutter barely worked. I mean, he's like, Mike, it doesn't work that well. I'm like, I don't care. I'm never going to get a chance to shoot one again. I want to review it. So he loaned one to me, and I'm glad that I did. I would love to, add one to my collection. But in terms of being able to use them, it's a camera that it's not going to be your favorite one to shoot, even though it's very, very cool and very pretty. But I am still trying to think of another SLR with rounded edges. I'm quickly surveying.
I can't think of anything.
There's one in Australia for you here, Miles. A Rectaflex Liechtenstein with a macro killer lens. So nice combination. Starts at about 17,000 Australian dollars. So that's about 10,000 or 11,000 US. So there you go, mate.
They seem all over the place, though. I don't know. I guess I don't know enough about them, of which models are particularly.
But if you buy it, since it's in Australia, have it shipped out to my place. I'll test it out for you, and then I'll send it over.
All right, deal.
All right, so I have it's not totally round. I have the Agfa Selectaflex. It's got like rounded corners, but it's still not quite Leica-esque. So I'm just glancing over at my shelf because I do have all my SLRs together, and I'm trying to find something where the edges are totally round, and they all seem to have angles, whereas the Selectaflex has like just curved edges. But this is a pretty camera too, even though it's not what we're talking about. Maybe we'll do an Agfa episode one day.
Does the Rectaflex have a swing back door, or is it the back completely comes off? Or
It comes off.
The back comes off. I think the whole back comes.
Yeah, and if you pull the back off on the inside of the bottom plate, it has all of the patent numbers in various countries. Many of these were imported to the United States. In fact, the one that I review on my site, right on the back of the Prism, it actually is engraved patented USA, and then it has a serial number too. So I think they were probably smart that if they were going to make this top dollar Italian camera, people in Italy were probably too poor to buy these in mass. So I think that this camera was always designed to be exported. So if you look, you'll see inside the door, there's patents in a whole bunch of different countries. You got Switzerland, Sweden, France, USA, Austria, Germany, Hungary, Netherlands, Great Britain. So this was a camera that was designed. The guy who created it was a lawyer. And so I assume he had some like strong business sense. and thought, hey, if this camera has a chance at being successful, it needs to be able to be sold all over the world. Telemaco Corsi was the name of the brains behind it. So if you do, Miles, end up with one, though, certainly please come tell us about it.
I'll ask Oleg if he's willing to work on one. And if Oleg will work on it, I will strongly consider it.
Okay. He might. He'd actually be probably a good person to ask. I mean, I don't think it's a camera he has done before, but I mean, there's only so many ways. Now, obviously, excluding the gamma, but there's only so many ways you can do a cloth focal plane shutter. So I have to imagine that even though this was kind of a one-off camera, if you're good enough, maybe it's not that hard to do.
It's probably very similar to a Leica shutter.
That'd be my guess. A lot of them were.
Yeah.
I lack the technical explanation because I've never repaired like a focal plane shutter before. But my understanding is that there's two basic designs: the Exacta style shutter and the Leica style shutter. There's something different about the way they're laid out. But if you know how to fix both of those, then you could probably do most focal plane, horizontally traveling focal plane shutters. So I know there's more, like I said in the book. There's hundreds of models in there in the Made in Italy book. This is a very deep industry, lots of cool things to collect. Almost all of them are gorgeous. Almost all of them have unique designs, features that you don't always see, or maybe it is a feature that you do see on another camera, but just the way that the Italians implemented is slightly different. When Theo was talking about his Fiat, it just made me think that it's like a cultural way that the Italian mind is thought is like, hey, we're going to do things our own way. Does anybody have any questions or any other models they want to talk about or ask that they've seen? Doesn't even have to be Italian. We got Bob here.
Mike, is that red book that you have basically the only generalist reference book there is?
That I know of. Yeah.
Robert was saying there is a book specifically that covers the Rectaflex. So there is a Rectaflex specific book. Okay. This is the only one we found that just sort of covers the whole industry. But I will warn you, it functions more like a catalog. So sometimes you'll see things, there's only like a paragraph or two about different models. It doesn't go into great detail about a lot of these.
But you can tick things off as you buy them.
Right. Yeah. It's like a McCown's guide. I mean, McCown's a Sugiyama guide to Japanese cameras. Even though they sometimes will have a tiny little blurb about the history of a particular brand or a model. That's how I differentiate books like Bob's book, Larry Gubas's book. Those are historical reference guides. These are more like a catalog of things that they make. But it's the only one I know of. It's the best source thus far that cover a wide number of Italian cameras and could be helpful in identifying a specific model if you were to find one in a thrift shop somewhere. But yeah, it was printed in 1983, so clearly it's been out of print for quite some time. But if you like books, that's the one to get for Italian cameras.
Mike, you were saying, or Bob, you were saying your book is still available?
Yeah, it's still available.
He'll autograph it for you, AJ. Although shipping to Canada is going to be kind of rough, though.
Yeah, and I'm still saving up for your T-shirt.
Oh, the Camerosity T-shirt. You just order it yourself. We had a couple people order them. Will, you got one, right?
I got two.
Oh, he's got two. Okay.
No,
yeah,
I was like, just in case I'm getting two.
Are they different sizes? Are you anticipating getting fatter or skinnier?
Well, I'm anticipating getting skinnier, so I should have got different sizes, but I got two of the
same. Yeah, there was one other person that posted a picture of themselves wearing one. We had been talking, Theo, 3 years about making T-shirts, and there's always been something that's come up. It's just really prohibitive, and you really need to come up with something where you just come up with the design, and then people order it direct from whoever's making it, because to have inventory would be just too difficult. It would be expensive. I wouldn't want to have boxes and boxes of Camerosity shirts here too. So I had made those yellow ones just for us. I mailed one out to Theo a while back, but we each have one. And I had printed up a new one because I wanted to change it to say film and digital. And the first versions of them, I used a company. The one you have, Theo, it fades pretty badly if you wash it a couple times. But the second versions are a little bit higher quality, and the silk screening will last a little bit longer. So those are the ones that I found. But if anybody's interested, we posted the link on the Facebook and the Discord. I actually pinned it to the Discord server as a sticky post. So if you want to see it again, maybe I'll include it in the show notes here. You just order it yourself. We make no money off of it. We don't do this for profit. They are kind of neat. If you walk around, you have a huge QR code on your back. So people are like, what the hell is that? The most common question I get is, does the QR code work? It's like, well, yeah, it does. It just takes you to our website. So
I did wear it out in public one day. I got no questions. I didn't get assaulted.
People weren't standing behind you with their smartphones taking a picture of your back.
All their phones, Yeah.
It would be quite something though if we get an episode where one day someone signs, I'm like, yeah, I heard about your show on a shirt somewhere. I was at the mall and I thought it was interesting. Transitioning topics here. I wish Steven was here because I feel like he'd have a lot to say about this, but there's this new Yashica camera, the FX. They keep calling it this hybrid digital thing, and it's all over social media. People are talking about the Kickstarter. It keeps showing up on Facebook as like promoted, ads or something like that. And I was wondering if, for one, or any of you guys, have you seen this? Like, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I've seen it also on my Facebook and on my Instagram. I'm actually waiting for my boss to get back to me because we sell one of the Yashica Instamatics. So I'm dying to see if we're going to get any of this type thing in the store.
The one thing that maybe gives me hope that it could be a step up from the Digifilm Y35, which has a CCD sensor as its main sensor, is there's two versions of this camera. One which has what they're calling a 13 megapixel, which to me looks just like another closed circuit security camera sensor, just like the first one did. But the second one claims to have a 50 megapixel sensor, which that's obviously marketing stuff. But I heard, or someone speculated that might actually be a smartphone sensor, like something you might find like a Samsung Galaxy or maybe an older generation iPhone. And if somehow the Hong Kong company that's making these, because, obviously Yashica doesn't exist anymore. This is just, they bought the rights to the name and they're trying to tap into nostalgia or whatever. But if they do somehow manage to put this thing out with even a 5-year-old or less smartphone sensor in it, I mean, I guess in theory, it could take some pretty nice pictures. It's still a crop sensor. It's not interchangeable lenses. In fact, in every single picture of the camera, they still have yet to show what the back of it looks like. So it does not have an optical viewfinder, even though it looks like it does. There's no prism in there. It's just an LCD, but for whatever reason, they're not showing the LCD. So that tells me it's probably not done yet. So we're probably quite a ways away from it being released. I have a review coming up real soon here of the first camera from 2017 they released, the Y35 Digifilm camera that had the little plastic cassettes that you insert into the back. This one in the promotional material claims to have film emulation modes. So my guess is they probably took that same technology, and rather than making you insert cassettes, it's probably just an option from some kind of menu system that the camera maybe has. So I don't know. Like, on one hand, if someone wants to build something and someone wants to buy it, then more power to them. Who am I to tell people what to spend their money on? It just drives me nuts that they keep making these things and giving this illusion like these are actual film cameras, or that there's even some semblance of link back to an actual film camera on them when they're just really, really low quality, cheap toys. So that's my little speech there. Needless to say, I will not be kickstarting them or GoFundMing or or Indiegogo, whatever.
I'm looking at the Kickstarter page now, and aside from looking, it's supposed to be a mock-up of an FX3.
Yeah,
but there's nothing showing.
You can't see the back.
You can't see the back, and I'm trying to get my head around where will you put the sensor if it's shooting a 35 millimeter film. And
it's a digital camera. It's got a crop sensor. It's got a crop sensor lens. If you look at the lens, it says something like 10 millimeters. So it's a cheap, tiny little lens that's held inside of a housing to make it look like a much larger lens.
Okay.
I have the review of the Y35, which looks like a Yashica Electro. And there is a video on YouTube where some group tears the camera down. It's an all-in-one unit, like the system on chip, they call it, where the sensor and the lens are all one piece, self-encapsulated, just soldered to a circuit board. So my guess is this is the exact same way. There is no film plane. Most likely, this thing relies on lead weights or some kind of metal in there to make it have a little more heft. I can't imagine that this company that's making these things went from basically making a cheap toy has somehow decided to make a real camera. There's just no way they'll do it. And if they did, and we've seen so many modern takes on new film/digital cameras try to be released. And the reason why they almost always fail and never make it to market is that to do this the right way would make the camera so expensive. These would be boutique, limited production things, not made in volume. They're not going to be able to make 50,000 or 100,000 of these things to keep the cost low. They're going to be produced in the singles of thousands of units. And that's just not enough volume to be able to make anything quality cheap. So the only way these things can ever exist is by taking shortcuts, giving them attractive bodies that have a retro design, look like they may be something from the past.
Yeah.
Reminiscent of a Yashica Electro or the FX or whatever. But in reality, it's just a hollow plastic shell with a system on a chip inside of it, a cheap LCD, a couple buttons. But in reality, it's probably not going to amount. I mean, I'd be happy to be wrong. And maybe the one with the 50 megapixel sensor will be marginally better, but it's never going to be any better than a cell phone.
Yeah. And I'm looking at it and it's film simulations, and I still get irked when I hear, digital has no grain, and yet they're talking about reproducing different films. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not my thing.
On this sort of like offshoot topic, I have a question for everyone as far as like collectors and cameras, and there's not a lot of large mainstream companies coming out with new cameras, especially film cameras, right? So, but the smaller companies that are like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with like Chroma Camera and the Alfie Titch, which I think is a really interesting camera. I would love to like get my hands on one. And there's the new, I think it's the SmartFlex, is like a 4x5 SLR that I don't know if that's fully out yet, but that one's really cool. They actually made, I think, 3 lenses for it, as well as the whole camera system. I don't think any of the companies are large enough for like mass scale of product. Although I don't know if any company would make that practical anymore, but they do seem to be smaller companies shipping actual product that is really interesting. I don't know if you guys have heard about any of them, but from a collecting point, like what is the aspect of collecting some of these newer sort of smaller niche kind of cameras?
I think that right now, like specifically to the SmartFlex, because of the ones you mentioned, this one I've heard of before, these are definitely meant to be user cameras. 3D printing has opened the door to a tremendous amount of things that weren't possible even a couple years ago. So you're starting to see a lot of like companies going from homemade to boutique, small run, but professionally done cameras. Plus, we're seeing a boatload of really, really good Chinese lenses, TT Artisans, 7 Artisans. There's a ton of them. Light Lens Labs, Paul's a huge fan of those. And some of them are really, really good. So combine an up-level ability to 3D print, and I'm talking more than just like a home printer, like, something that a small shop would be able to buy. Add to that something that uses a Chinese made lens with a simple shutter or no shutter at all, and you can produce some really wild, cool new designs. I think, in my opinion, the reason why most of these cameras in this segment are medium and large format is because you have to go big to make it worth the while. A field photographer that loves shooting big images today on film is going to be more likely to spend $1,000 or $2,000 on a brand new 4x5 or 8x10 or whatever camera that they can swap out whatever lenses they want, add different backs to, build a system around, than if somebody were coming out with a 35mm SLR. In my opinion, the likelihood of somebody being able to small scale make for lack of a better word, let's say a new version of the K1000, a mechanical 35mm SLR that's high quality, good lenses, but affordable is going to be extremely difficult to do because you almost have to have a higher price point for some of these cameras to even make it worthwhile. And again, I just think you have to go to a different type of photographer that's going to be willing to spend that kind of money on some of this stuff.
The Alfie Titch was the one that kind of struck me when it first came. I think it came out before the Pentax half frame, and it's a half frame camera. And that one was the first one that struck me as like having a larger production run, larger market and stuff like that. It's England. I think the guy's in England who just did that and made it. But it's interesting. I think it's a combination, I think, of 3D printing, some electronics, maybe auto exposure, and it's got these sort of like 4 lenses that rotate around a barrel. And I want to say after that, he made another lens. But yeah, it was just kind of interesting to me that sort of the new frontier of cameras are going to be much smaller scale. And, just as like a collecting standpoint, it's like all this unique stuff, right?
That one's actually quite unique because the guy that actually made it is actually an electrical engineer or electronics engineer. And it's actually named Alfie after his son. I think that's where it's a bit different because a lot of the simpler ones are made by someone that's just an enthusiast. You've got a combination of an electronics engineer who's also an enthusiast here who started that one. And that's probably why it's got a bit of a bigger production run and a bit more advanced features, while the other ones are primarily 3D printed. And that's the problem. You need the right combination of people with the knowledge and the commitment, the interest in this hobby to actually do it. And then spend time doing it. So otherwise you need to have multiple people. And I don't know if the budgets are there to actually do that.
Well, and I'm looking up the Alfie while you guys are talking. And now that I see it, I have seen this one before. And please believe me, I am in no way dissing this camera. I think anything that someone wants to make is cool. And I give these guys credit for coming up with something new, right? Like this is a plastic bodied camera that has a rotatable lens where you can switch from like a 4-element glass lens to like a meniscus lens to like a cheap wide angle
or pinhole,
right? But the range and price, brand new for the less model, is $400 US dollars or 299 pounds, to the premium version, which is 499 pounds, which comes out to be about 660 US dollars for what is really a box camera. Yes, it's a little bit more advanced than that. It does have a little LCD for a display. It does have, the different lenses on it too. And it is cool, but there's absolutely nothing this thing can do that you can't just do with any number of less expensive cameras. So like, to me, the target customer for something like this is not us, or at least it's not people who like old cameras for collecting and using them. This is for somebody who has no interest in something old and just wants to do modern day photography, but in a different way. And they're willing to pay a premium for that. I'll never forget this is before Central Camera burned down. So pre-2020, we'll say 2019. I was at Central Camera talking to Johnny Sisson. And while I was there, this college student, couldn't have been older than 19 years old, comes in and says, I want a film camera. And he's like, what are you looking for? He goes, well, my dad said to get a Nikon. So Johnny reaches up and grabs an F3 right off the shelf. In Central, stocked high quality stuff. They offered a warranty on it. Their stuff was always serviced. So, you're going to pay a little bit more for something like that. And I think at the time, and mind you, this is 2019, I want to say they charged this kid $699 for this camera. And I kept my mouth shut. Like, I'm not going to, interfere with a sale. And to this college student or whatever, and I keep saying college student because he was significantly younger than me, but like, he didn't bat an eye at that. Like, to him, that's just what that kind of camera costs. And $699 for a Nikon F3 that's in perfect working order, I suppose is a good price, right? I mean, if you look up what those things cost new and then did an inflation adjusted price, it'd be way higher than even that today. So really, a $699 is right on par with a properly serviced Nikon F3 back in the film era. So to be able to get something like the Alfie for $600 and some dollars, it's technically brand new and gives you multiple lenses. That's a different market though. That's not a collector. That's somebody who is buying it because in their mind, this is a niche that they're willing to invest money into. And I think that's very cool. It's just not for me, So my long-winded answer is I don't see these appealing to too many collectors. I feel like people that are actual collectors like me who like to use theirs would be much happier just using an older camera and getting as good, if not better, shots from a camera that we paid significantly less for, and then we could just put it back on our shelf and move on to something else.
I guess my reference was, as a collector, all I have is old cameras, but I was thinking like I know my grandfather had a friend, and like he was a lawyer, not a photographer, but he collected Leicas because they were gorgeous. It was like collecting watches, you know. So he was buying them in the time when they were being newly made or they were different things, thinking, oh, at some point, you know, in the future, these are going to be things. So I was thinking, as collectors looking in sort of our modern time period, what do we collect in some regards as looking towards like the future, the newer sort of element of photography? That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, it's a good question. I truly don't know. Will these cameras be made in a large enough quantity that they'll be worth collecting? Maybe. I mean, how many Rectaflex Liechtensteins were made? 300? So I'm sure there's probably more than 300 Elfies out there. So maybe one day there will be a 2075 edition of the Camerosity Podcast where they're talking about this wonderful multi-lens camera with a turret on it from 2025 that you got to look up.
Problem is, we'll all be so old we won't remember.
Right. We won't remember.
We'll start the conversation and it'll all be gone.
Yeah, that's a good question. I so badly want film to thrive. I so badly want to see new models come out. I have a very skeptical approach to how successful any of these will ever be. Honestly, really the biggest enemy to new cameras is how many old cameras still work fine. You know, it's like what they call a double-edged sword, whatever. I love Leicas, and the fact that I can take a 1936 Leica 3, send it off for service, and it works just as good as brand new, I would do that 10 out of 10 times than buy some new Yashica camera, even if it's new. Because I tell you what, that Yashica camera, even if it is made well, I guarantee you 20 years from now, it's probably not going to be working, whereas that Leica still well.
Very true.
I think that's really what's the obstacle from any new camera truly. Because, like, look at digital cameras. I mean, Nikon, Canon, they're struggling to sell stuff anymore. I mean, nobody buys point and shoot digitals anymore. Very few.
Oh, they're making a resurgence. They're actually making a resurgence. Brand new digital point and shoots are making quite a significant resurgence. See, Miles nodding there. So, and then he's the youngest and most hip of us. So anyway, and that's it's actually become a thing where people have turned back to the point and shoot digitals because they've realized that these mirrorless are still bulky.
Yeah. Make no mistake. I would love to be wrong. I want there to be more cameras. I use my cell phone a lot for stuff, but I like real cameras. I like the tactile feel. So I'm all for it. I have too many old cameras to invest in too many new ones.
I can't seem to get the film to work properly in the digitals. It just won't fit properly.
It doesn't. I know. I've had that problem too. And every time I do it, then the film's ruined. So I can't keep affording to lose film. Who knows, though? I mean, maybe here I am talking about these 1936 Leicas. Maybe we'll get to a point where literally nobody's making film anymore. Honestly, to me, that's more likely. For one day, nobody left on Earth makes film anymore than cameras stop working. Because you'll always be able to fix a mechanical camera within reason, of course.
Yeah. As soon as I believe as soon as Kodak is gone one day, then film will stop, because a lot of even their independents rely on not only some respooling, but even
cinema film.
Yeah, but even the equipment and parts to actually make film, film itself. If Kodak isn't around, there's no one to buy that stuff. So no one's going to make those parts or those machines or anything like that, and it's just going to dry up.
One of the most interesting things Robert Shainbrook told us, I mean, he said a lot of really cool things, but do you remember, Theo, when he was talking about why they can't ever make IR film anymore? Because the machines that all exist today that make film measure the length with infrared. Remember that?
Oh, yes, that's correct, yeah.
He said that for them to even try and make infrared film again, they would have to make new machines. And none of the machines that were in use that used to make infrared film exist anymore. That they're all newer machines, and by virtue of how they work, they would ruin the film as it's being made. And I thought of that, and I'm like, you know what, that's a really good point too. Like, the same reason Kodachrome can't ever be made anymore is because it's not that the film can't be made. Kodachrome is actually a black and white film. It's the chemicals that need to process it don't exist anymore. They are so toxic that even the United States, which it's way behind many other countries in banning hazardous chemicals, like you can't, like mercury batteries aren't made anymore. The chemicals needed to develop Kodachrome don't exist anymore. The machines, we talked about Fuji's peel apart film, they destroyed the machines that made it. And even Polaroid originals, the Impossible people that are doing their best to try and recreate, Polaroid film stocks, they can't do the peel aparts. Like sometimes you get to a point where a technology is truly dead because the things needed to make it are also dead. And if film ever does die, film cameras ever stop working, in my opinion, it's most likely going to be because film isn't made anymore. And I do think, I hope not. I hope not big time. But I do think that that's going to happen within the next 50 years. I hope I'm wrong, though.
I hope you're wrong too, Mike, because film has come back to me so strong. And since the pandemic, I do know that there was a number, when we talk about collodion, which is wet plate, there were only about 200 people in the world who developed or who processed collodion plates. Since the pandemic, since 2020, apparently the number has gone over 5,000 now today. So I don't know if film is, I mean, Kodak is only one. Fuji is starting to look back and start thinking, maybe they should go back into reproducing some of their old films that they've discontinued, not because they stopped, not because they didn't have the materials or because there was no market for it.
Right.
I think the market is, and like I tell a lot of my students, I'm not an advocate for digital or an advocate for film. I mean, I know which to use for what reasons.
Sure.
But I don't know. I like to be the pessimist, not the pessimist, the optimist, and say that film is here to stay.
To be clear, the basis for why I said what I said is when the technologies that are needed to make another technology don't exist, it's very difficult to keep making them. The guys that they wanted to make the Nikon S3 and SP, the special editions, they had to find the people that did it the first time to teach the new people how to do it. Now, and I'm glad that they did that then, because that was 25 years ago. Yeah. It's been 25 years since the S3 2000 came out. If they tried to do that today, none of those guys would be alive. I am sure that every single one of those old guys that they brought back in to teach the young guys, those guys are all gone. So Absolutely. Maybe some of those young guys remembered some of that stuff, but a technology can survive one generation stopping, but once the generation before it stops, that makes it infinitely more difficult to do. So,
well, that's like the story about the Pentax, the 17 or the 17. Did you hear about that?
Well, the guy that's designing it is taking a step away. I know that.
Yeah, no, but when they had to go back and they had to find the old assemblers to explain to the engineers why certain pieces were absolutely needed. If they had not had that, they would never have gotten past the film advance system.
I see. That's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, a film advance system has not been touched in the last 50 years until they started producing the 17.
For those of you in the future who have found this podcast on some ancient archival server, here we are in 2025. We would like to know how much of this we got right, or hopefully very wrong. And if wrong, you guys can make fun of that Mike Ekman guy who did not have the foresight to predict the future. So
Post-it note on our graves.
There you go.
Put a post on our graves. All right. Well, we've talked about things dying. Mike doesn't think film is going to keep being made 50 years from now. I hope I'm wrong. I think that's a good stopping point. I think this episode went really, really well. I felt pretty strongly about doing something for the Italian camera industry because, as we've all discovered here, it is a very deep, very rich, very fascinating industry filled with some incredible models. They are expensive. They can be difficult to find. But when you do, you could at least say, hey, I got something that doesn't look like, I'm not just buying another Leica or another Nikon or Canon or Fuji or whatever. These are some really, really cool cameras that are worth exploring. I wish there was a better reference out there for it. I will try to do my best to cover as many of these models as I can with the limited information that I have been able to find. But I encourage people who are out there and maybe you're tired of some of the same old cameras to just start looking for some of the Italian brands. There's some really, really cool models out there that are worth adding to your collection. Today is May 19th, so we're going to do episode 93 2 weeks from today. So that'll be June 2nd. For you, Theo, that's June 3rd. That is going to be a Euro time zone friendly episode. I don't know exactly what time it's going to be, but in the past, we usually try to aim to where like Greenwich Mean Time London and Central European, so like Italy and Germany, where it's like 7 to 8 p.m. for those people, so that it makes it a lot easier for people in Europe. And we've had people call in from Johannesburg before too, so South Africa, join us who maybe otherwise can't because it's the middle of the night when we do this. And fortunately for Theo, it means it's super early in the morning. And I know with your current job that may be difficult for you too, but we do like to do the European friendly episodes from time to time. Paul's still going to be in Ireland, but he says he should be able to join us for that one. We don't yet know what we're going to talk about. Typically with those episodes, we just kind of like to turn it on and see what goes, since we're getting some people who don't normally get to join us. Who knows? Maybe we'll talk about Italian cameras with people who live in Italy.
What about Irish cameras? Must be
Irish
something.
cameras? There's two. There's the Corfield Paraflexes, which are those cool little 35 millimeter cameras that have a periscope. They were originally made in England, but later models are made in Ireland. And then the Nimslo, that 3D camera with the 4 lenses, those were produced in Ireland at some point too. There's probably others, but those are the only 2 that I could think of. So
we'll give Paul some homework.
Didn't Hanamex have a factory in Ireland for a while?
Maybe.
Ooh,
I
possibly. Okay, there's some homework for me too. There we
so
go.
Homework for Theo, yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys for coming. This is a cool episode. Robert, it's great to see you. AJ, Will, Theo, Miles stayed to the very end. We lost Walter. He showed up and then left us. Walter, where did you go? But hey, we have a lot of new hosts for our next episode, right? Everybody's a host today. It's like Oprah. You're a host, and you're a host, and you're a host, and you're a host.
What's under my seat?
Yeah, right. It's not a Pontiac, though.
Film.
As always, the topics and discussions on the Camerosity podcast are influenced by you guys. We keep getting questions from people. Theo, someone posted something on our Facebook page wishing that we would talk about certain things. And it's like, come on the show and ask us those questions. We really don't get a lot of emails in our mailbag. Alan Paris stopped sending us stuff since the last episode.
Otherwise, I will talk about the Mamiya 7, which was one of the complaints.
We were told to stop talking about that, so we have to drop it. But no, if there's something you want to hear, please just join us on the show. Ask a question. Even if we're talking about Italian cameras and you want to ask about a Soviet rangefinder, do it. We don't mind getting off topic. We love people who've never been on the show before. Don't feel like you have to have the knowledge and collecting experience that we do. We like beginners or people of all skill levels. But thank you guys for coming, and everybody have a good rest of your day.
Take care.
Take care, guys. Have a wonderful week.
All right.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Bye, everyone.
I got my my Italian camera book.
Little red book, huh?
There you go. Nice.
Care of Robert. This book is interesting because it's half in English, half in Italian.
Right.
So like
really?
you'll read one page, and the left side is in Italian and the right side is in English. So it's like you have to pay attention to which page you're on. But it's probably, I mean, I don't know of too many Italian specific books about the Italian camera industry.
Made in Italy, Italian cameras. Okay, I gotta check it.
I'm sure it's out of print.